When someone calls me the day after a car accident and asks, what should I be doing right now? This is the conversation we usually have. Now, first of all, the accident is over, and now we can focus on what happens next, because what happens in the first week matters more than most people realize. Not because you're trying to build a lawsuit, but because small decisions early on can quietly shape everything that follows, medically and legally. Now, most people think the crash is the hard part. It's actually not, because the crash is only a few moments. However, the aftermath of the crash can last days, weeks, sometimes months. And the difference between a smooth recovery and a complicated claim often comes down to what was done in the beginning. The first week is where patterns are set, it's where documentation starts, it's where injuries are evaluated. It's where statements are made, and once things are said or signed, it becomes very difficult to change. Now, if you understand what actually matters in the first week after an accident, you can avoid the majority of preventable mistakes I often see as a personal injury attorney. So I want to walk you through what to do after a car accident. Right after a crash, your body is running on adrenaline. And what this does is it makes you feel capable and steady in the moment, even if your body just absorbed a traumatic force it's not used to. And that's why so many people typically say things like, I'm fine, or I think I'm okay right after impact. And in the moment, they may genuinely believe that, but physiologically, it's simply too early to know. Inflammation hasn't fully developed yet, muscles haven't tightened, and soft tissue hasn't stiffened. So what you're feeling in that first hour is often not the final picture. Now, when someone tells me they're experiencing pain now, but they felt fine at the scene, that's usually an indication that it was too early to evaluate. A lot of injuries, especially neck and back injuries, don't fully present right away. Whiplash, for example, is often a delayed onset injury. The force in a car crash, even a minor one, stretches muscles and ligaments beyond their normal range. But the soreness, the restricted movement, the headaches, those often show up days later. What happens most of the time is this: stiffness sets in gradually, headaches develop, you wake up and your neck doesn't turn the same way that it did, or your lower back feels tight. That delay is common and it's predictable. But here's the mistake I see most of the time with delayed symptoms. The mistake is assuming that because you felt fine initially, nothing happened. And that assumption is what leads people to ignore early symptoms. And once early symptoms are ignored too long, two things may happen. First, recovery may take longer. When inflammation and soft tissue injuries aren't addressed early, the body often compensates in ways that can create additional strain. Muscles tighten to protect injured areas, and other parts of your body start absorbing stress they weren't meant to carry. And over time, that can make a relatively straightforward injury more complicated than it needed to be. Second, the timeline becomes harder to document. When there's a long gap between the accident and a medical evaluation, that gap in treatment begins to raise questions by the insurance adjuster regarding the legitimacy of your injury. Now, you don't need to panic or assume something catastrophic occurred, but you need to pay attention. Notice changes in how you're feeling or limitations in movement and range of motion. The earlier you understand what your body is doing, the better decisions you can make moving forward. Let's talk about the scene itself. Now, once everyone is safe and things have settled down, documentation should become your focus. Now, you don't need to turn the scene into a production, but you do want to be thorough. Take photos, and not just of the vehicle damage. You want to try to photograph the overall scene. And here are some examples of things I suggest you try to capture. The direction that vehicles were facing, or where each vehicle came to rest after impact, weather and road conditions, lane markings, signage, and traffic signals, and the lighting and the visibility. And if there were skid marks or debris, photograph that as well. What you're doing in that moment is preserving information that will disappear quickly once the scene is cleared and the weather changes. Because 6 weeks from now, no one will remember those details clearly. Not you, not the other driver, and certainly not the insurance adjuster handling your claim. If there's ever a disagreement about fault, the discussion will likely come down to reconstruction of the accident. Where was each vehicle positioned? What lane was involved? Was there an obstruction? Was there signage that affected right of way? Your photos will preserve helpful details about the scene, and the more clearly the facts are documented, the less room there is for confusion later. Another issue I see constantly is communication at the scene, and this one is subtle. People apologize reflexively, or they try to smooth things over. And they'll typically say things like, I'm sorry, or I'm fine, or the accident wasn't that bad. And usually those words are coming from a good place. But here's the problem. Those words don't always age well. And let's just use those three phrases as examples. So for example, in the moment, saying I'm sorry might simply mean the situation is stressful, but later it can be interpreted as an admission of fault. Another example, saying I'm fine, might simply mean I don't feel pain right at this second, but later it can be interpreted as confirmation that you weren't injured. And lastly, if you say something like this accident wasn't that bad, it may be your attempt to calm the situation, but later it may be cited to minimize damages. Now, you're not doing anything wrong by being polite, but you do want to be aware that statements made at the scene can become a part of the record, so be careful. Police reports do summarize conversations and statements made at the scene. And once something is documented, it carries weight, even if it was said casually. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be defensive or you need to be silent, but you should be measured. You don't need to debate fault at the scene, particularly while adrenaline is still high. Simply exchange information, which is typically identification and insurance details. Answer questions honestly but briefly. And just let the formal process unfold later when everyone is calm and thinking clearly. Because the goal in that moment isn't to win an argument, it's to avoid unnecessary confusion. Let's move forward a day or two after the accident, and this is where the second wave of mistakes usually happens. Now, the crash is over, the car is in the shop, life starts moving again. And then you wake up and something feels off. Your neck doesn't move the same. Your lower back feels tight when you get out of bed, or you may even feel foggy, fatigued, or unusually irritable. Nothing dramatic, but definitely different. And that different is where people hesitate. A lot of people decide to wait it out because they think it's probably a temporary soreness or it'll loosen up, and they don't want to overreact. Now, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Soft tissue injuries are not always immediate and obvious. Inflammation builds gradually, and muscles tighten to stabilize injured areas. Ligaments that were stretched don't immediately signal the full extent of irritation. So what feels minor on day 1 can feel very different on day 3. And here's where getting evaluated becomes important. You're asking a medical professional to determine whether what you're feeling is temporary soreness or something that needs attention. And that early evaluation serves 2 purposes. First and foremost, it protects your health. Second, it documents timing, and timing matters. Insurance companies look closely at when treatment begins. Remember, they evaluate claims chronologically. So if someone waits weeks before seeing a provider, the insurance company may question whether the injury was related to the accident. They'll often ask what changed, or even worse, they may argue that something other than the accident caused the pain. Now, this is a predictable problem, and predictable problems are avoidable. So if something feels different after a crash, the right move is not to panic, but you do want to verify with a qualified medical provider. Let's talk about the phone call that comes right after a car accident. The other driver's insurance company reaches out, sometimes within 24 hours, and they're usually calm and polite, and they more than likely are going to ask how you're feeling and what happened, probably as a recorded statement. Now, on the surface, it feels routine, and in many ways it is. But here's what most people don't fully appreciate. That conversation is not casual, it's by design. Your responses become a part of the claim file, and it's documented, it's summarized, and it's evaluated. The adjuster's job is not to be your friend, it's to evaluate risk. That includes liability, damages, and potential exposure for the company. And their goal is to save their company as much money as possible. So questions are structured for a specific purpose, to reduce or eliminate their liability and to put as much blame on you as possible. And remember, this is happening very early in a time when you may not yet know the full extent of your symptoms, or you may not remember every detail of the accident perfectly. And usually you're still processing what happened. But here's the key. You're not required to give a statement to the other driver's insurer at all. And that's really important to understand. You are allowed to take time for yourself and to seek guidance first. And slowing down and taking that time for yourself isn't being difficult or adversarial. It's being careful with information that may permanently affect your rights once recorded. And once a statement is documented, it's very hard to revise it later. Here's a small habit that makes a significant difference later on after an accident, and almost no one does it. Keep simple notes. And it doesn't have to be a formal journal or anything dramatic, just brief entries over the days or weeks following an accident. how you're feeling on that day, or difficulty with movements, whether you slept through the night, if you missed work or had to leave early. Anything that used to feel routine that now suddenly feels harder, you want to document. Now, these don't have to be long entries. A few sentences is enough, because here's what happens over time. Memory fades, and not because you're being dishonest, but because human memory simply compresses experiences. So 3 months later, when someone asks, how did the injury affect you? Most people struggle to answer clearly. They remember that they were uncomfortable, or they remember that it was frustrating, but the specific details blur. And in claims like this, specifics matter. Things like, how long did it last? What couldn't you do? How did it interfere with your daily routine? A simple running log preserves accuracy, and accuracy builds credibility. When your account is consistent over time, medically and personally, it strengthens the integrity of your claim. You're not trying to exaggerate anything, but you are trying to be precise. And I see this all the time. Precision is very powerful in injury claims. And it's much easier to be precise when you wrote things down while they were happening. Not every accident requires an attorney. Some claims resolve smoothly, particularly where liability is clear or treatment is minimal and the insurance company handles things reasonably. And in those situations, the process can be straightforward. But certain situations deserve early guidance, not because you're looking for a fight, but because complexity changes the risk. If fault is being disputed, even partially, that changes the dynamic. If you are undergoing treatment and you don't yet know the full extent of your recovery timeline, that matters. If you've missed income or expect to miss income, that introduces financial components that need to be evaluated properly. And here's where to really be careful. If you're being pressured to settle quickly, especially before treatment is complete, that's a signal to slow down. If something about the situation feels rushed, unclear, or overly simplified, that's worth paying attention to. An early settlement may seem efficient, but once a release is signed, the claim is closed. And if new symptoms develop later or complications arise and treatment is longer than expected, your options are narrow. And narrowing options too early is one of the most common long-term mistakes I see. So early guidance doesn't mean you're committing to anything. It just means you're understanding the landscape before making permanent decisions. And you can't really make an informed choice if you don't understand the implications. Early clarity keeps those options open, and having options open is leverage. If you zoom out, here's the bigger picture. The accident itself is one event, but the recovery process is a timeline. And most of the real complications I see don't come from the crash itself. They come from what happened in the days after. Early missteps happen, and not because people are careless, but because they're shaken and stressed, and they don't know what matters yet. Rushed statements, delayed evaluation, incomplete documentation, or signing something without a full understanding. Those aren't small technical errors. They're critical mistakes that can quietly undermine your claim. And the frustrating part is this: most of those problems are preventable simply by being disciplined. So the first week after an accident is not about emotion, it's about discipline. It means slowing down, documenting what happened, listening to your body, and being careful about recorded conversations, and not making permanent decisions before you understand the situation. Because once you sign a release, that's permanent. And once you lock in a statement, that's hard to unwind. So the mindset I want you to take away from this is simple. Just simply slow down, document thoroughly, listen to your body, approach insurance communication deliberately and carefully, and don't make permanent decisions while you're still in the early fog of an accident. This approach protects your health first and protects your options second. Now, if you're dealing with a situation like this anywhere in the United States and you want clarity about your options, my contact information is below. And if this kind of breakdown helps you think more clearly about the process, subscribe, because I'll continue explaining how injury claims actually unfold and what most people aren't being told in the beginning.